Welcome to episode 127 of I Thought I Knew How, a podcast about knitting and life and all sorts. I'm your host, Anne Frost, and this episode was recorded on May 13th, 2025. Today we're going to talk about a little wool adventure I went on yesterday. I've also been to 2 fiber festivals in the last 3 weeks, plus I want to fill you in on the Woolly Good Gathering in Edinburgh. So we'll talk about all of those in this episode, plus I have all the details on this year's Shetland Hogmanay boxes, which will go up for pre-sale on May 17th, which is this coming Saturday if you're listening to the podcast as it's released. Lots to talk about today. Let's get to it. I don't want to brag, but it has not been 4 months since the last episode. What? It's only been about a month and a half since the last time I was able to check in with everybody, which in the past I would apologize for, but with everything going on, I feel pretty good about. Since I last released an episode, I have finished the last module of the degree before I head into the final mega module that will start at the end of May and run almost right up to the end of the year. I'm fairly confident that I will be back with more episodes in that time, but if I'm not, it will be because my master's thesis isn't allowing me the time it takes to do an episode. And I'd like to formally apologize now if that proves to be the case. I have had a few comments from folks that they are missing the episodes, and I'm very flattered to know that my work has been missed, but I feel like it is for the greater good. As the end of the program approaches, new and exciting options are starting to take shape, and I feel like no matter what option becomes reality, the podcast always has a purpose in the upcoming new normal. And in the meantime, I have been doing more impromptu live content as I'm able because it's much easier to just hop on and blether for a bit than it is to research, write, record, release, and promote an episode. For instance, nearly every Monday over on my Instagram account, I've been doing an Instagram live check-in with Melinda from Alchemy Fiber Mill, where we've been acting as accountability partners to get through our unfinished object piles. And along the way, we're sort of throwing in information about other things we've been doing and learning and working on. And I think that in the coming months, when I'm dealing with the master's thesis, it's going to be more realistic to produce written content on my blog, which has heretofore been sadly neglected. But I suspect that if that does prove to be the case, I'll post about it on my socials and possibly share the link to my mailing list. And honestly, thank you for your patience as I go through this program and the kind encouragement and messages that folks have sent along the way. Some of them have been very well timed indeed. And now, before we go any further, I want to tell you about this year's Shetland Hogmanay boxes. First things first, because I don't know when you're listening to this, pre-orders will go live at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on May 17th. That's 7 p.m. British, and very early in the morning on the 18th if you are in New Zealand or Australia. You can place your order at store.ithoughtIknewhow.com. Okay, all of that is there at the start in case it's like 2:01 on May 17th when you're listening. I'll share the actual details with you now. The Shetland Hogmanay Box for 2025 will feature 31 days of packets for you to open through December. The packets for the first 28 days will contain 25-gram balls of fingering weight yarn, also known as jumper weight if you're in the UK, from 6 Shetland yarn producers, including Aister Ewe, Jamieson's of Shetland, Laxdale Yarn, the Silly Sheep Fiber Company, Uredale Yarns, and Westland Wool. Day 29 will have a 100-gram ball of fingering weight yarn from Longsoon Yarn, spun from the Shetland sheep of Donna Smithscroft and her neighbors on Burra in Shetland. This is the first year that Donna's yarn will be featured in the boxes, and I'm very pleased to have her work represented. The design this year is by Mandy Moore, whom you may have met back in episode 69 of the podcast. Mandy is a Shetland designer, knitting teacher, and test knitter, and she has created a Fair Isle project for our homes this year that features joyful colors and will allow us to learn about the variations of the yarns from each of the producers and observe how color pairings can influence our perception of color. We will use nearly all of the yarn in the box, and the project will be knit in the round and then cut. Do not worry if you have not cut your knitting before, because this year, in addition to the daily unboxing on the Purl Together YouTube channel through the month of December, you can also join me for a series of 4 Zoom meetups as we cast on our projects, meet again to address any questions, cut our knitting together, and then show off our final projects. The online events will be spaced over 10 weeks, starting on January 1st and running until March 14th. After the first meetup, the rest will take place on the weekend at a time that means the typical knitter in the UK, the Americas, and New Zealand will all be awake. Australia too, though it will be a very early start for you. There will be a private Facebook group this year for those who order the box, for folks to share progress and ask questions. And of course, again, I already mentioned, but of course we'll be doing the daily unboxing videos through December on the Purl Together YouTube channel. Back to the box contents though. Day 30 will have a packet of goods to help you set the mood for a cozy night in with your knitting as we cast on together for the new year. And the final day will reveal the pattern. There are 60 boxes total, and I really do mean 60 boxes. If you cannot order one before they sell out, I am sorry, but there is nothing I can do about it. There are 11 Shetland-based businesses involved this year, including 2 yarn producers who are specially dyeing yarn for the boxes. And I have to get stickers printed to label the packets. And this year, there's going to be a couple things that have to come in from off-island that will make sense when you open the box. They're still Shetland things, but they're coming from off-island. But suffice it to say, once they're gone, they're gone. This isn't like a box from a hand dyer where they commit to a certain number of boxes and then they dye extra of the yarn to be safe. And then they end up with enough yarn that turned out right that they can put together a few more boxes. There are 60. It does not matter if you email me after they're all sold and ask nicely. There are 60. Please don't do that. It makes me feel sad. I will say that, as is ever the case, the rights to the pattern will revert to the designer on January 1st, so you will be able to buy the pattern directly from Mandy Moore in the new year. But you'll then have to order the yarn from each company directly or do a stash dive of your Shetland wool. The retail value of the contents of the boxes this year is $310 given the current exchange rate. Add in the cost of access to the Zoom meetups, the packaging to make it into a mystery yarn box experience, and the fact that if you were going to piece this together yourself, you'd be paying for shipping from the 11 different companies. The price goes up quite a bit from that retail value. The actual cost of this year's boxes, with all of those extras included, is $300. And that does include the cost of shipping to anywhere in the world with tracking except the EU. This year, because of changes to the import laws of the European Union, I cannot ship to anyone with an address in an EU country. The ability to even buy the box should be disabled on the website if you're in one of those countries, but if you manage to figure out a way to do it, I'm just going to refund you, so please don't. I wish it wasn't this way. I didn't make the import rules. The boxes will ship from Shetland in mid-October, which is plenty of time for them to arrive by December 1st. If you are ordering your box to be shipped to the US, please note that the current law is that you can import up to $800 worth of goods each month for personal use without having to pay duties or tariffs. The boxes should arrive to you in October or November, so plan any of your other international purchases accordingly. This is the 4th year that the Shetland Hogmanay boxes have happened, and so far they've all arrived safely, knock on wood. They've all arrived on time, knock on wood. No one has ever reported to me that they've had to pay duties, no matter what country they were based in. Again, knock on wood. I know I say every year that I can't wait, but here we are again with Anne's inability to wait for you to see what's in the boxes this year. I picked up yarn from 3 of the makers when I was in Shetland last month, and the colors are gorgeous, and I want to cast it on, but I'm being good and patient and waiting until January 1st when I will be done with my degree and I can knit along with everyone else. Again, the website is store.ithoughtIknewhow.com. The listing will go live May 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Good luck. Time for some music to knit by or to run over to the website and order by. This is one from the vaults. I was listening to it again the other day and remembering how much I enjoyed it the first time, so I hope you'll enjoy hearing it again. This is Tom Goldstein with an unnamed guest singer performing What Love Means to You.
I never know what I want. You always say that I'm always wrong. Hey, rise and shine, 'cause all the time you want what's mine. We never kissed goodbye, 'cause I know you'll come back soon. The sparkles in your eyes can be seen from the moon, and I know there is no truth in what love means to you. It's not the right time to talk about love, 'cause you always see yourself above me. We never kissed goodbye, 'cause I know you'll come back soon. The sparkles in your eyes can be seen from the moon, and I know there is no truth in what love means to you.
I mentioned at the top of the show that I've been to several fiber events recently. I'm going to start with the ones in the US. The first one was the last Saturday in April, and the second one was just this past Saturday. The Connecticut Sheep and Wool Festival takes place about an hour from our house and is one I typically get to each year, while New Hampshire Sheep and Wool was a first for me, as it's a bit of a trek for us to get to. We actually decided to go up the day before and spend the night in Manchester, New Hampshire, before we headed over to Deerfield for the event. Similarities between the two. They both take place on county fairgrounds. It was raining for both events. Not that the organizer had anything to do with that, but both fairgrounds had most of their vendors and attractions either in buildings or under tents that were able to cope with the amount of rain. Both events were organized by their state sheep and wool growers associations and lean more towards farm products, though both also had their fair share of hand dyers and vendors who were selling wool-adjacent products, and both had supplies for more than just knitters and crocheters. Differences. Connecticut Sheep and Wool is only one day, and that day just happens to be the same every year as local yarn store day. And while that is a bit of a conflict of purposes, it's also the smaller of the two events. So you could do something like spending a few hours at Connecticut Sheep and Wool and then do a bit of a yarn crawl to the local yarn stores in the area if you want. Connecticut Sheep and Wool was almost immediately off the highway system, so it's easier to get to if you're coming to it from a distance. New Hampshire Sheep and Wool is in a more rural setting, but we didn't have any issues with traffic on the roads getting there, and it really is a lovely area to drive through. It did seem like they had more to offer as well, as far as the number of vendors, the amount of food options, and the number of classes and demonstrations. There were lots of people there in multi-generational groups like grandma, mom, child. And the New Hampshire event is over 2 days. Both had the feel of a rural wool festival, which is where I feel most comfortable when it comes to these sorts of events. Is one better than the other? I think it's safer to say that they both provided an experience commensurate with the effort it took to get to them. because Connecticut Sheep and Wool is only about an hour from my house. I was happy with the time we spent there and the amount of shopping available and the demonstrations taking place. And because New Hampshire Sheep and Wool required 3 times more driving each way and an overnight stay, I was glad to see that it was bigger and had more to offer. Now, of course, that's because I was coming from Connecticut. But I think they were both well done, and I'm glad I attended both. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about what I saw at each because there is a formula that these sorts of rural events follow as far as what they have. Vendors, a used equipment sale, some classes and demos, some cool sheep to see, and where they take place, typically a local fairgrounds. In New England, they're even mostly held in the spring, the one exception being Vermont, which takes place in the fall ahead of the serious wool-wearing season. And there's nothing wrong with following a formula for an event. Your visitors and vendors know what to expect. You can perfect the process over the years. And I will say that from a visitor's perspective, both organizations seem to have the process down. Kudos to all involved. The other event I went to since I was last with you was the Woolly Good Gathering in Edinburgh. This event falls into a different category. It's a city-based indoor fiber event. There are definite benefits to an event like this. The fact that it's based in a city means it's close to a large number of interested people, and it's easy to get to using personal or public transportation if you want to come to it from a distance. The fact that it's inside means that vendors and attendees all have the assurance that once they're inside, they won't be dealing with the elements while they're there. Typically, you're not going to see animals at an event like this, though, because it is indoor in a city. The Woolly Good Gathering does have all the things you would expect at a fiber event in a city, though. Vendors, classes and talks, and snacks. Bing, bang, boom. You have those 3 things. You have a fiber festival in any city. But Woolly Good also has some features that I think set it apart from most of the other city-based fiber events that I've been to. I know of some that have some of these features, but Woolly Good has all of the following. First of all, they have what they call the Designer Atelier, which is an area where vendors and designers who are connected with the festival can leave their designer samples for visitors to see in person and try on if they wish. I actually monitored that area several times over the 2 days as part of my volunteering, and I think that this one feature alone sold more patterns and yarn than any other because it made such a difference to be able to actually handle the items rather than just trying to judge whether they would suit you from a photograph. People were noting whether they would need to lengthen or shorten their own version, judging how the colors worked for them, discovering projects they hadn't even seen before. It really was a great idea. The second thing that they do really well is they do a great job of curating their marketplace. I know around the area that I live in Connecticut, there is Connecticut Sheep and Wool, as I mentioned, and there are local yarn stores that host events where they'll bring in one or more vendors, and like vineyards and orchards and historical sites will put together a weekend market and have some fiber booths as part of their marketplace. And there are a handful of makers who tend to show up at a lot of those. Some of them are at nearly all of them, and that's fine. You have to respect their hustle. But at the same time, as a consumer, I'd love to see more variety. Woolly Good really works through the application list to offer spaces to people who aren't appearing everywhere always. And so you end up with a group of vendors who have really excellent projects who maybe haven't been able to get their foot in the door elsewhere. And very established vendors who are more selective about when they join a marketplace because they're busy with other things like writing books or running mills. And what you end up with is a marketplace that feels really fresh and has a lot of original and high quality products. The third thing is that they design the event with accessibility in mind. And when I say accessibility, I don't mean just considering ways in which people may be physically disabled by the features of a venue, but they also consider the ways that events can impact people's mental and emotional health. So the venue was physically accessible, yes, but the ticketing was spaced through the day to keep the crowd levels to a manageable size. So it never felt like the crowd was a press. And they also had a time at the start of each day where people could enter early and shop before the space filled up. They also offered companion tickets for people who had a disability that required a second person there to help them if they needed it at no extra cost. There was also a quiet room available for visitors and vendors to take time out away from the hubbub and stimulation to just let their mind and nervous system settle. And there were volunteers available to facilitate this for their vendors who needed to make use of the room. Which leads me to the fourth thing, which is that they take exceptional care of their vendors. I've been to events to help friends with their booths where the organizers sell the vendors their space, and maybe that will include a lunch, maybe not. But if the vendor wants to take a break to run to the bathroom during the event, they need to bring a friend or hope that someone in a neighboring booth will keep an eye on things for them while they run. Woolly Good plans for volunteers to roam through the marketplace to deliver snacks and water as vendors need them, and to step into their booths if they need to use the quiet room or the bathroom. There were also volunteers arranged to help with setup and move out for those who needed assistance to do so for whatever reason. I was volunteering for that move out period, and I would say that my time was fairly evenly split between a few vendors with some mobility issues and a few vendors who were just mentally done and needed help getting through the process of wrapping things up. Vendors are a very important part of any fiber event, and a lot of the time organizers overlook their needs because they figure that vendors are there to sell and that making money is the benefit they get out of being there, and that they should feel grateful to have access to the audience at the event. But the vendors are a key component of a fiber festival. The marketplace is a major draw for visitors. If you want good vendors who are happy to be there and providing a good experience with products your visitors want to buy, you need to treat them well and make sure it's not a miserable experience for them. And I think the Woolly Good Gathering is the best of the best at this. Was the event perfect? I cannot say it was perfect because no event is ever perfect, but I will say this. None of the issues that sparked the few complaints that I heard marred the event overall. And all of the issues that prompted the few complaints were out of the hands of the organizers. In my program, one of our tutors would start each class by bringing up these, horror story scenarios for any event manager, like a necessary food truck backed out at the last minute, the venue you were planning to use for your event closed down, the forecast calls for flooding, your keynote speaker was found dead a week before the event. And then we'd break into groups and have 5 minutes to come up with a solution. And then we'd come back and share it with the cohort just to practice thinking on our feet, because these sorts of things happen all the time with events. And you run these scenarios ahead of any event and come up with a risk assessment with every bad thing you can think of and your solution for it. And that risk assessment document only matters to a point, because the world will come up with more ways for things to go wrong than you can fathom. And you have to be able to come up with a workable solution, or be okay with doing without something, or sometimes making the decision to cancel. The Woolly Good organizers, in their second year of putting on the event, dealt with several of these types of scenarios beautifully. I hope they are really proud of the festival they've conceived and executed for 2 years running, and hopefully will continue to provide this event for Scotland's wool lovers well into the future. So, should you go to any of these 3 events I mentioned? That is a tricky question. I think I would say in all 3 cases, yes, if you live in the area. The Connecticut and New Hampshire Sheep and Wools are great rural fiber festivals, and I think that either festival still has room to grow without losing their character. But I also think that you would get as much or more benefit from finding the sheep and wool event nearest you where you could support the wool economy in your area. And likewise, I think that even saying how spot on right I think the Woolly Good Gathering has done with their event concept, it is an event that has purposely limited the number of attendees each year as part of that concept to create an event that is a positive experience for everyone. And I don't see that being an ethos that they will change. If you live in Scotland, absolutely get your tickets and go. If you can easily travel there from not too far away, absolutely. If you're going to be in Scotland as a tourist while it's going on, absolutely. Get your tickets and go. But I say the following with the hope that the organizing committee doesn't murder me. I think that classifying the Woolly Good Gathering as a quote-unquote bucket list event at the size that it is would do more harm than good. I would hate to see it be overtaken by tourists rather than serving its community. And I would not like to see the demand rise so much that the organizers have to manage the feelings of people who can't get tickets because it's become an event you must do to prove you're a cool knitter, like an event like Rhinebeck has become. It just doesn't have the space. It doesn't have the ethos. It doesn't fit for it to become one of those things that people crowd into. It just won't be the Woolly Good Gathering if that is what happens to it. And I could get into more about that, but I won't bore you. I will end up totally nerding out in an event managerial way that we don't have time for. But that's all I'll say. I love the Woolly Good Gathering. I want to see it be successful. Absolutely. I don't want to see it get destroyed under the weight of popularity. And I do acknowledge the irony of saying that as someone who's gone both years now as a volunteer, but I will point out that I split my life now between the US and Scotland. So it is kind of my community event too, even though I still have a hard time acknowledging that I have a foot in both countries. But let's not dwell on my weird inner monologues. Instead, let's have a song. This one is from Humans Win, who often partners with other singers, and they don't know who the actual singer is on this track, but I quite like the song. It's a poppy number, and we're about halfway through the show, so maybe set the knitting down and have a little dance or swap out the laundry. This is Better Than Us.
Crash down to the real world now. I told you, you have my heart. We run to where we belong. I told you, you are the one. You're my satellite. Won't you take me higher than the sun? We can go all night till we find our light and show everyone. Nobody does it like us. When you're feeling down, I know I won't let go. I will catch you when you're spinning out. 'Cause it's the love we found. It's worth more than gold. Better than anything I've ever known. When the world's too loud and I need a home, you will be the one that I can call. When the days are long and I've had enough, I know you will be there. 'Cause nobody does it better than us. Nobody does it better than us. Nobody does it better than us. Caught up in the feeling now, I keep it in my heart. We run to where we belong. I believe it, you are the one. You're my satellite. Won't you take me higher than the sun? We can go all night till we find our light and show everyone. Nobody does it like us. When you're feeling down, I know I won't let go. I will catch you when you're spinning out. 'Cause it's the love we found. It's worth more than gold. Better than anything I've ever known. When the world's too loud and I need a home, you will be the one that I can call. When the days are long and I've had enough, I know you will be there. 'Cause nobody does it better than us. Nobody does it better than us.
got a text a few weeks ago from Erin Pirro from Morehouse Farm asking if I wanted to go with her and get some of their wool made into pellets. Yes, of course. Naturally, I would. A few years ago, the Western Massachusetts Fiber Shed applied for a grant to buy the 2 machines necessary to create wool pellets. One machine is a wool shredder, which chops the wool into shorter lengths, along with anything else that gets chucked in with it. So in the case of Erin's wool, we were turning her animals' skirtings from the fleeces, so like the bits around the edges that were loaded with poop and other unsavory bits that would not do well in the process of being made into yarn, and the shorter wool from their bellies. You throw the wool into the shredder from the top in handfuls, and it drops down to a series of blades that look like the blades from an extra long push lawnmower, which chews them up a bit and drops it through into a bin. When the bin is full, you take it over to the pelletizer, which looks like a soup pot at the top with a grinding device at the bottom of the pot. That grinding mechanism forces the wool into the holes, heating it up and compressing it into pellets that then drop down a chute at the front of the machine and into a bucket. As the pellets come out of the machine, they're still warm, and the pellets are kind of squishy. So when we got back to Erin's place, we spread out old feed sacks and poured the pellets out on them to give them a chance to cool down and harden up. The report from Erin this morning was that they have firmed up a bit overnight. I'm curious if they will firm up more or whether the lanolin content of her particular batch of wool is playing a role in how squishy they are. Time will tell. A 5-gallon bucket holds about 20 pounds of pellets, and voila, after about 90 minutes, we had worked together to turn 54 pounds of otherwise unusable wool into a soil amendment that will slowly add nutrients for plants as it decomposes and will help the soil retain water. But calling this unusable wool is a bit of a misnomer because in reality, Erin could have just spread this wool over her garden and worked it into the soil as it was. But a lot of gardeners out there are reluctant to handle raw wool because of the poop content. The pelletizer helps in 2 ways. It heats the shredded wool in the process of forming the pellets, which kills anything that might be hitching a ride. And the shape of the pellets helps some people be more accepting of the product than they would be seeing it in its raw state. I have used wool pellets in the past. Listener Suzanne is actually making her own pellets in the American Midwest from unwanted fleeces in her area, and I've used some of them in a planter in my yard, as well as adding them to indoor plant pots. 2 points to keep in mind. The pellets really are super compressed, so you want to actually dig them into the soil, because if you just toss them on top when they're watered, they will re-expand and just become wool sitting on top of the soil. So be sure to mix them in. Unless, of course, you want them to work like a mulch to keep the weeds down, then by all means, just throw a good handful on top and water them well and let them plump back out. Second, while they will help with water retention in the pots, that's not indefinitely, of course, yeah? Your plants are going to root through the decomposing wool and draw the water out of the soil. So, of course, make sure you still keep an eye on the soil's moisture levels. The Western Massachusetts Fiber Shed pelletizing machine has been busy. In this area, quite a few wool producers have made use of it. You see them often at wool events. You know, people will bring them and have them as an item that a non-crafter can purchase. And renting the machine is not cheap, though. Some folks have balked at the price of wool pellets, and I can understand that. But after seeing the price of the rental versus how many pounds of pellets you walk away with, considering the time and the gas it took to get to the machine and back and the time to make them and eventually to package them, I think the price is fair. And I suspect that over time, the cost will come down as more of these machines are put to use and then paid off and continue to be used. We spent some time speaking with Peggy Hart, the woman who houses the machines in her barn, and learned that the pellets have been assessed by a few university labs that have found them as effective as fertilizing your soil as using chicken manure in the garden. Though, as Erin observed, with chicken manure, you have to let it decompose to a degree before you can use it so it won't burn your plants. And of course, using wool pellets is a lovely natural fertilizer for gardens. You don't have to worry about what's in the bagged fertilizers you're getting at the garden center. It's all stuff that started as grass, and it's meant to take those nutrients back to the soil again. I know this is going to surprise you, but I love the thought of providing another way for people to use wool, even the undesirable bits of it, to help support the people who are getting those desirable bits made into yarn and then on to us fiber crafters. Speaking of fiber crafters, at one point, Peggy invited us around to see her looms. Now, if I were to invite you to come see my looms, you might expect to walk into a room of my house with like a shacked 8-treadle or an Ashford rigid heddle loom. We followed Peggy around to the back of her barn and entered the door to a walk-in basement. And I think the first noise that came out of my mouth was, "Oh!" because the room was full of steel-framed looms that Peggy had saved from area mills and was putting to use weaving her own blankets and blankets for area wool growers. Peggy is the real deal. After chatting a bit about what she was working on and the looms themselves, we went back up to check on the pelletizing, at which point she shared that she wrote a book about wool and went to grab a copy. She came back with Wool, Unveiling an American Story of Artisans and Innovation, which she published in 2017. After a quick flip, I knew that this was a book I was going to want to read properly, so I happily paid for a copy and took it home with me. To introduce you to Peggy and her book, I'm going to read a bit from the bottom of page 15 and on to page 16. My telling of the story of wool in the United States looks at wool within the context of American history and culture. It's a history of the consumption of a commodity as much as the manufacture of it. What did consumers take from what was offered and why? Consumption includes the satisfying of basic needs and also the gratification of wants and desires. Consumer needs shape the evolution of wool items such as blankets, broadcloth cloaks, overcoats, and the ubiquitous blue serge suit. The wool industry was impacted by cultural trends, and its fate depended on how it responded. Comprehensive accounts of sheep raising in the wool industry include Cole's American Wool Manufacture, published in 1926, and Edward Wentworth's American Sheep Trails, published in 1948. It's obvious that the story of wool has evolved quite a bit since these books were written. My aim is not to write the business or economic history, but to tell the story from the vantage of a craft practitioner, someone who came to weaving using industrial equipment at exactly the moment that all the mills were closing. In 1981, I worked as a weaver in the samples department at one of the last mills in Rhode Island, the Worcester Textile Company in North Providence. In 1982, I bought my first Crompton & Knowles loom and began producing blankets by machines after years of hand spinning, plant dyeing, and hand weaving. These 1940s vintage looms are great. They allow me to weave thousands of blankets a year. I think that's enough to give you a sense of what this book will be about and who Peggy Hart is. I've picked my way through and read a paragraph here and there ahead of this episode, and I'm looking forward to sitting down with it to read a chapter or two daily. The book covers the history of wool in America through to the decline of the industrial mills in 1980, and then has an epilogue covering the craft-centered view of wool from then to now. I imagine many of you have read it already, but I'll provide a link in the show notes for those who would like to get a copy and join me. And of course, I'll add a few links in the show notes of places you can order some wool pellets so you can give them a go, including Erin's page, which will have a little video of our day together at the Pelletizer, and Suzanne's Pellets in the Midwestern U.S., and I'll see who else I can find to perhaps give you some options local to where you are. One last song before we wrap things up. This is I Wish I Could Sing It For You by Nicholas Rowe.
What's the use in trying to write another song when I've got 100 others that are only half done? They've been stripped for parts and left to rust somewhere in the junkyards of my mind. I don't recommend you look for them, you never know what you might find. What's the use in trying to explain who I am? I am just a combination of every book I've ever read, every skyline I've looked upon, and every tune I've ever hummed. Every alleyway I've stumbled down, and every girl I've ever loved. But I wish that I could tell you how I feel. And I wish in a notebook, and I call it a new song. All my deepest fears and worries set to melody so that you can sing along. I wish that I could tell you how I feel. I wish that I could let it all out. I wish that I could open up my heart to you. I wish that I could sing it for you, sing it for you now. Sing it for you now. Sing it for you now. Oh, yeah. Sing it for you now. Oh, yeah. I wish that I could. I wish that I could tell you how I feel. And I wish that I could let it all out. I wish that I could open up my heart to you. I wish that I could sing it for you, sing it for you now.
A few more things before I go. Issue 7 of the Journal of Scottish Yarns will be dropping soon. I have an article in it talking about the panels I knit and hung in front of my first flat in Shetland. In the article, I draw attention to the women of Shetland whose work inspired or influenced each panel, as well as my trepidation in creating and hanging them as a transplant to the area. I had a sneaky peek at the whole issue as I looked over my part of it once it had been typeset, and it is once again full of fascinating articles about the textiles of Scotland and has more beautiful patterns for us crafters. You can pre-order your copy over at yarnjournal.com, link in the show notes, of course. Incidentally, as part of the article, I talk about how I have moved out of that flat and into a different one, and I just saw today that my first little flat there has been sold, and I'm not sure if the new owner will leave the panels hanging or not. Time will tell. When I was there in April, a few were looking a little droopy, so I may go by and introduce myself and see if they prefer me to take them down for them or to tighten them up. While there are sheep and wool festivals coming up in Rhode Island on the 17th of May and May 31st to June 1st in Maine, I will not be attending either of those this year. The first is the day the Shetland Hogmanay boxes go live, so I want to be near my computer in case anything happens. And the second hits on my birthday, so I'm going to stay home and celebrate with the family. But I will put links to both in case you are in the New England area and want to try one of the other sheep and wool events coming up. That said, Massachusetts Sheep and Wool is on May 24th and 25th, and I will be there on one of those days, so I'm not sure which yet. If you are headed to the Cummington Fairgrounds for that event and you happen to see me, do say hi. Remember to bring cash because the Wi-Fi isn't great and it makes it easier to pay the vendors. Plus, they get to keep 4% of the price instead of losing it to the card processors. And be sure to take in one of the sheepdog demonstrations because they are fantastic. I am not even going to pretend to know when I'll be back with another episode. So I will just say, please just stay subscribed and it will download to your device when I do produce the next one. And if you'd like to keep in touch in the meantime, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, or through my mailing list, which I will link in the show notes naturally. If I'm not back for a while, Do stay safe. Enjoy your springtime if you're in the Northern Hemisphere and your fall in the Southern, and I'll be back as soon as I can. In the meantime, thank you for listening and knitting with me for a bit. If you enjoy the show, please rate and review the show in the app you use to download it, and I'd love it if you would share the episode with a friend. The show notes are where you will find links to all the things mentioned in the show, so be sure to check those out. Find me on my social media accounts as I Thought I Knew How. The groups on various platforms are all called I Thought I Knew How Podcast. Until next time, may you be blessed with stitches that never drop, yarn without joins, and plenty of time to knit.